Hey, this is Brainwavez and I'm gonna show you how to create a drop like Peekaboo, Sully, or G-Rex.
We're all in danger.
This whole project file, as usual, is available on my Patreon along with many others, so feel free to check the link in the description if you want to get it, and let's get started. So for this particular project, I'm using Ableton Live 12 and I'm using Current as the main synth for my basses. So first of all, I just wanted to give a big thank you to Minimal Audio for reaching out and giving me a copy of Current. I've been really loving experimenting with the plugin and creating new sounds. So starting with the drums, they sound like this. So kick, 2 snares layered, some hi-hats, and the most interesting part of the drums, I would say, is like this little hits with a lot of reverb that I think that's what's moving the drums forward a little bit more, and it just helps a ton with the flow of the drop and to make things feel fuller in the frequency spectrum. That's for the drums. And moving to the basses, I have this first bass. So all of the basses, as I mentioned, they're created with Current. If you are not familiar with the plugin, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. So inside Current, you have 4 views. You have the play view, engine view, effects, and stream. So I'm just gonna start with engine, and in here you have the wavetable tab, which shows 2 oscillators with a lot of wavetables and your usual knobs for the wavetables. Then you have a granular sampler. You can load a ton of sounds and experiment with them in cool ways. Then you have your sub oscillator and a sampler. Then to the right you have filters, an FMing tab. Here is where you can set FMing to the oscillators or to the sub, and then a mixer view where you can solo elements and control the volume of elements. Then in here you have a ton of control with LFOs, envelopes, and also curves that you can create yourself. Then going to the effects view, you have a ton of room for effects, and something that is pretty cool is that you can use more than one unit of the same effect, so I could put like another distortion, as I actually did in here. Then the stream is mostly for looking for presets basically, and the play is a very nice feature where if you map some macros, then you can play with this matrix. So I'm gonna show that in a second, but this is just like a quick overview for you guys to get familiar with the plugin, but I feel like it's pretty intuitive, to be honest. So that was actually a preset that I just tweaked. So this starts with a sine triangle. So there is a first envelope controlling the position of the wavetable. Then on the second oscillator, there's the analog folded sine wavetable. And there is some FMing going on from the oscillator B, amount 12%. The envelope one, once again, is modulating that. Then a filter that is only affecting the first oscillator and is being modulated once again by the first envelope. Something really cool that I like about Current is that you have your matrix in here and you can click the envelope that you want, and then you can see what is being modulated by that envelope. and the values. So that's pretty cool, I think. Then that's it for this tab. Then in the sub sampler, there is a smooth sub preset with these values in here. And I'm just gonna move to the effects. So curves first. Distortion. This distortion unit, if you're familiar with Rift, which is another plugin from Minimal Audio, you're gonna notice some similarities. Then compressor, altered tape, preset. Then I added this other distortion and I chose this preset. So that's where it's giving it that nice distorted vibe. And then reverb, which is also once again another preset. And that's for the patch itself. Then outside of it, there is some erosion and some EQ, just boosting the sub, the low mids, and the 3K area. And lastly, a reverb throw automation, just to create that tail, which is helping with the flow. So that's the first sound. That's like the opening bass. And then I have the main bass, which is this one. And I also separated the sub from that one. So I'm just gonna show you the main bass first and then the sub bass. And this one, it's a preset that I created from scratch. So I have this curve going on, 1/16th rate, that is modulating the level of this first oscillator. The second oscillator is the sine harmonics, and in here in the waveform manipulation, I'm using the pitch and series effect. And I'm mapping some macros. I'll go through that in a second. But for now, the pitch series is at 85%. Then I enabled FMing from the oscillator B, 26%. So that's like the foundation of the sound. Then I put once again the smooth sub preset. Also the level being modulated by the curve. So that's for the engine view. Then jumping into the effects, I have polar distortion, bounce wave shape in the positive distortion, and vertex wave shape on the negative. So with those values in there, hard mode, and I'm using the tone channel just to adjust a little bit further the distortion. So these are the values that I'm using in there. Dry wet is at 83%. Then compression, and I'm just using classic OTT in there. 58% of dry wet. Then I have a filter, also being modulated by the cutoff. Low pass 6 in here, and I'm using some spread, so that's making it wider. And I think that's all the parameters that I'm modulating with the curve 6. So you can see the values in here. If you guys are following along, then you can copy this. And then reverb, and I'm using the small room preset. And for this reverb, I'm doing something interesting, and something that is really cool about Current is that besides having like your LFOs, envelopes, and curves, you also have envelope followers. So this basically maps the output of the plugin to a curve. It just creates a curve with the output, and then you can map that curve to whatever you want. So that's what I'm doing with the dry wet knob of the reverb. So that's pretty useful for sure. I'm doing some gentle limiting and saturation in here. Basically, this is just like a soft clipper integrated within the plugin. Outside of it, I'm putting even more reverb with another envelope follower. So I'm just mapping the dry wet of this envelope follower to the reverb. Then I have an EQ just boosting around 500 and also around 4K, and I'm cutting the low end because I have my sub bass for that. Now I mentioned some of the macros before, so I want to show you what I'm doing with that. So all of these macros are just helping to create variation within the sound. This first macro, for example, is controlling the rate of the sound. So that's where you get like those high speeds in those sections. Then I'm also using the macro 3, and that controls the harmonic series pitch. So that's where those like little pitch up and pitch down effects are coming from. And then I also have, this is not from a macro, but just for something that I configured out of the plugin, I have the oscillator B position wavetable being modulated. So first is at 0%, and then in this section is around 5%. And all of that is just creating some nice variations to keep the sound fresh. Something that you could also do is, I'm just going to duplicate this and I'm going to show you another way of maybe starting getting variations out of it, is just once you have your macros mapped, or if you're using a preset, then you will probably have some macros mapped already. You can go to the play view and start like just messing with these knobs and maybe just like record while you do it, and you can get like a cool amount of different variations. So let me show you what I mean. So yeah, I think this module is really fun to play with, and it just helps a ton to spark some creativity for sure, at least for me. That's for the main bass, and then for the sub, what I'm doing is just taking all that I don't need. So basically no wavetables, just the sub in here, still playing with the curve to create that modulation. There is no FMing or anything, obviously, because I'm just using the sub. And then in the effects, I just have polar distortion. I took out some of the other elements, but I still have my filtering. In here, I have a low crossover, meaning that the lower part below 144 is not being affected by the filter, just everything above that. So that's really cool, and you could also make everything below 144 mono just by hitting this button, which I thought that was really cool as well. So I'm doing that, and then some reverb once again, which honestly, since this is only sub bass, I don't need this reverb, so I'm just gonna take that out, and then I'm just cutting everything above 150. Then the second time around, this is clearly a variation of the first patch that I just showed you, but I'm just messing with distortion presets. So in this time, I'm using the force quit distortion preset. This one is like a multiband distortion. So I'm affecting these areas individually. And I'm also mapping the resonance of the distortion to this curve in here with this modulation that you can see. So dry wet is 25% and all of these settings. I'm still playing with some automations from the macros like this. just to keep it interesting. But besides that, is pretty much the same preset. Then I have a couple of like background paths. So let me show you how I created those. I'm just using the sampler inside of Current. I'm just putting a lot of swarm reverb into it. 89% of dry wet and 97% of decay, so long reverb. And then I have that other one which I really like, and for that one I'm using the granular synthesis. I chose the Aftermath sample in there. And what I'm doing in here is putting some post-process into it, so without that, it sounds like this. Pretty dry, but then I enabled distortion, clipped low mids preset, drive around 5, squashing the sound a little bit with upward compression 9%. Then delay this Delight Swell preset. The fact that this has presets, it just makes everything really fast, because you can just start going through presets and like tweak them real quick, and you can get somewhere cool really easily. Dry wet is 50% in here. Then swarm reverb, the same preset that I was using for the last one, 36% of dry wet and 89% of decay. And then lastly, I just put an EQ just because it was getting a little bit resonant, so I'm just cutting that peak. Then I'm just cutting everything below 300. And then lastly, I have this bass fill. That once again was a sound that I created. So in here, I'm using the roll-up wavetable. I'm using this curve to automate the level and some other stuff. So that's the first oscillator. Then my sub, soft square, also modulating the level in here. Soft clip in it, 64%. Then a sampler, spec abstraction is the one that I chose. Also the level being modulated in here. Filter in the effect tab, morph 24. And I'm just modulating the cutoff with this. And the spread is around 18, minus 18%. 48, 22 in here, and 0. And these values in here. Dry wet is all the way up. So in here you can see what I'm modulating with this curve. Then I enabled the phaser, 4th notch preset, 22% of dry wetness. Polar distortion, digital growl, 38%. Drive around 7.2. Then swarm reverb. Default preset, I'm just a tiny bit, 5% in there, 7% of decay. An EQ just boosting the highs. Another filter. Once again, playing with this. Polar distortion, once again, Redux Chuck preset. 13% of dry wet. 3% of drive. And that's pretty much the sound. Then I have that layered with this sample that I actually also created in Current. I was doing like a sample pack for my Patreon, and I was doing all of the basses with Current, and I decided to use this one for this project. And that just has some EQ and a lot of reverb. and this other one. So that's for all the basses. Then I have some fills, like that type of stuff. Notice that all of this has like a good amount of reverb or end delay. And that's on purpose, it just helps a ton.
Really?
So yeah, just trying to convey a vibe and to move the beat forward and to keep it interesting. So that's pretty much it for this one. If you guys want a more detailed tutorial on how to use Current, let me know. I can do that. I'm still learning myself, but I'm really enjoying like experimenting with it. As usual, this whole project file is available on my Patreon, and I'm also doing one-on-one music production lessons. So if you're interested in that, check the link in the description. Once again, thank you very much Minimal Audio for reaching out and for sponsoring this video. Please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and I hope I see you around.
We're all in